How have you been? Tell me.
I think today is, I don't know, a bit of a. I don't even know how to answer that today. I'm okay. That's all I have today compared to other days. I don't know why. It's just, I don't know, slowly coming to the realization, as I said last time, that it's just the new norm. So that's me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was tough. I suspect yesterday was tough for too many people. A number of really disturbing, triggering information that we all learned. And yeah, it was for some reason quite tough some hours when, you kind of feel that you don't want to do anything, or you don't want to, feel anything, but a lot of people are going through it. But what we're doing today, the work that we do, it helps, it helps to center me. And I hope it also kind of serves as a big collective therapy session for all Ukrainians.
Well, I'm glad we can create this space for you and for others to come together and just chat with each other. And I'm super excited to have Olga with us as well.
Yep. Olga is our featured Ukrainian today. For those folks who join us for the first time, this is Ukrainian Spaces. Hashtag Ukrainian Spaces is where we amplify Ukrainian voices and meanwhile also decolonize Ukraine conversations on Twitter. So we decided to create it because we see millions of Ukrainians with perfect English sharing their stories across all social media platforms. Well, yet, despite all of that, the conversations about Ukraine are still dominated by foreign, mostly white, mostly male folks. And not only it continuously robs Ukrainians of their agency, it also perpetuates outdated, misleading, and false narratives about Ukraine and Ukrainians. So we decided to foster a relaxed, safe, and chill space for Ukrainian voices to express themselves without the need of fitting any Western boxes. And the rest can use the space to educate themselves and decolonize their views of Ukrainians and Ukraine. Yeah, I see. Ola, maybe you can speak so we test the connection.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, Slava Ukraine.
Hello, Slava. I hope the connection will be good enough. I'm actually speaking to you from basement. It's my now workplace in a basement in Western Ukraine where I am. And usually I'm using my laptop because there is a cable, connection to internet, and Wi-Fi is not so good. But since for Twitter Spaces, you can only use your smartphone. So yeah. I hope the Wi-Fi will be enough. That's why there was some technical issues at the beginning.
No worries. We super appreciate every minute you can share with us. And of course, it's, sometimes I feel a lot of guilt asking Ukrainians who are still in Ukraine to join anything like that, because you kind of feel like it will be a waste of their time. But I hope it won't.
No, you shouldn't, and it won't. And as I told you before, like me speaking up and participating in various events, speaking to the media, and also writing myself and getting, my pieces published is in a way that actually helps me go through all this. I feel much worse when I have, well, frankly, very rare moments, but when I have nothing to do. That's why you shouldn't feel guilty. I think all of us journalists who are on the ground are happy, to speak and to, if we have time, if we among other tasks, and I'm happy to participate in this, and and to speak to you and others.
Absolutely.
We are grateful nonetheless that you have time to join us.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce Ola to everyone else, although I don't think she needs any introduction anymore because she became quite crucial voice in covering Russian invasion and Russian genocide of Ukrainians in the last month. But we date back with Ola a very long time ago. And, this is something that others should know about Ukrainians for sure, that we're in our mid-30s. But when you're in mid-30s in Ukraine, you kind of already lived a couple of lifetimes worth of 30s compared to many other folks in the West. So we've been together working on a lot of great stuff for almost a decade. We've co-founded Hromadske International, which back in 2014 was the first and the biggest broadcast platform explaining Ukraine in English for the rest of the world. And Ola specifically, what I always admired about her, not only because she's like fantastic, brilliant woman and extremely kind human being, that she also spent so many years working, covering Ukraine in Italian as well for Italy, which is extremely hard media space to talk about Ukraine. And she did it nevertheless. And this is what I wanted to ask you first. Because even before the war, myself, I was a bit already fatigued for a couple of years doing interviews and, writing, because I felt like I'm, saying one thing over and over and over again, and nobody listens much. So how do you, keep doing this, and where do you find this resilience and, strength to keep doing that, despite that what we faced in the last decade?
Yeah, thank you, Maksym. And it's true that we've been working together with Maksym for many years, and Hromadske was one of those spaces, of really a lot of creativity was there, a lot of great journalists. This was a TV station launched basically simultaneously at the beginning of the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine back in 2013 by a group of journalists who just wanted to have an independent media outlet that would not be controlled by the government or by big businesses, something that was really rare at the time in Ukraine. And thanks to the Revolution of Dignity, Hromadske became one of the leaders of the information space in Ukraine. A lot of people watched it and trusted it because it broadcast live and streaming basically all the events of the protests. And when me and Maksym joined after the Revolution of Dignity, right? I came at Hromadske in April, and I think you more or less at the same time, right?
Like February or something, yeah.
Yeah, so there wasn't. It was just the medium that was only catering to Ukrainian audience and only speaking about events in Ukraine. But we thought, okay, we should also speak to people all over the globe and tell them what is happening in Ukraine. Do this English edition and department that would broadcast in English. And also, I worked on the creation of an international news desk, foreign news desk in Hromadske that I was later leading for almost 6 years while I worked there. That's just to provide some background and also some background on myself, that I'm actually an international news correspondent. I was working in international news desks for almost all of my career, and it's only in the last little bit less than 2 years that I'm mostly focused on, covering Ukraine for different media and for different global media. And
how you keep doing that? Yeah, how you keep doing that?
Italian media among them. Well, with Italian, it's a bit different. In fact, I've been speaking with Italian media about Ukraine actually since the Revolution of Dignity back in 2013. Speaking with RAI, Italian public broadcaster, and also Mediaset Group TV stations, and later also wrote for some Italian print media. So it's a long story mine with Italy because I speak Italian and I have a lot of connections there. And in fact, it's a difficult story because over these years, also I became also kind of frustrated, as you said, Maksym, with that. In fact, Ukrainian voices, somehow it doesn't get through. It's you keep repeating the same things, about Ukraine, but it almost like nobody hears you, and there are always the same like experts or so-called experts who very often, have never been to Ukraine. They do not speak neither Ukrainian nor Russian, and they have no knowledge or very limited knowledge or knowledge of Ukraine through a lens of Russia, of Russian imperialistic narrative. And it's very difficult to counter this so-called experts and analysts and journalists who are speaking with a lot of authority. And even though like you are based in Ukraine, you are like speaking from Ukraine, and you have this local knowledge and knowledge of the context and of Ukraine's history, you kind of always have to, you almost feel like this distrust that you're not taken as seriously as these serious experts, very often males. That's like another dimension of this. So in fact, now I'm speaking less with the Italian media also because I have so many requests from the media all over the world, and it's somehow unfair to focus just on one country and refuse requests from other countries. So I'm like trying to diversify, let's say, the audiences I'm speaking with, and also because, as I said, like this frustration with the level of coverage of Ukraine, specifically in the Italian media, was like mounting inside me, and at some point I just like kind of gave up. I'm not saying that I'm not like commenting anymore for the Italian media. I do, but I'm doing that much less, and mostly for the media and for the journalists I already like know and trust.
In fact, you told me, we shared many times like experience, when you're invited to speak and you're invited as this so-called, token Ukrainian, and they have like a broadcast and they say like, oh, can you give us a feel what is happening on the ground? And then you have like 2 minutes to explain, and then they like, yeah, sure, thanks. And then they move on to 30 minutes of, foreign experts, whatever, discussing, explaining Ukraine. And this is extremely, it's always happening, but it's always every time very frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel that. And I also hear that from my, Ukrainian friends in Italy, that when they are invited to speak to the media, it's almost always like the questions they get are only about their feelings and their emotions. But then when, they want to do some analysis and to tell some context and some history, they are immediately like interrupted and cut off. And then some local expert who in most cases has never been to Ukraine starts, goes in with his or her analysis, mostly his. And you do not even have a chance to respond, which is, the most frustrating. Like you cannot even counter those arguments that are very often are based on, Russian interpretation of Ukraine's history and a lot of disinformation as well.
Yeah, for sure. Ola, I actually also wanted to ask you a question. As Maksym was saying, we've been doing this for a couple of sessions with a few other people, and one question that we ask everyone, and I know we just said, we have a lot to contribute, and especially, as a young woman, I understand the importance of hearing Ukrainian female voices and, women who have been working in this field for such a long time. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, as a Ukrainian, female journalist, sort of what is your assessment of how not just the situation, but how it's affecting, women in Ukraine differently, how the war has been affecting women differently, and what are sort of the topics that people are not covering that they should be covering about women in Ukraine right now?
Well, it's affecting, the war is affecting women on so many levels. Well, of course, it is about like loss of life and, a lot of women who have been already killed, and children who died as well. And also we are hearing increasingly stories of sexual violence, of rape on behalf of Russian soldiers. And some of like the most horrific stories came in yesterday about a woman in Kyiv region who was raped repeatedly by Russian soldiers. Before that, her husband has been killed, and they said like he was a Nazi and so he deserved to be killed. These soldiers told this to this woman, and her son was there in another room while this was happening. So like, terrible story. And then another one from Mariupol where a woman was raped again, like repeatedly by several soldiers, and that was happening, in front of her 6-year-old son who was in the same room. And she died, actually. Like, the violence committed against her was so brutal that she died of it. And these are just like the stories that have been confirmed, like officially and communicated. And there are so many other stories that are circulating in Ukrainian information space, like echoing these stories, and sometimes also involving teenage girls, very young girls and children. So very actually even difficult to like tell these stories, but it's important to tell them in order for these crimes to be to be present, the knowledge about them, the information of them to be present, and also to stress that the perpetrators should be brought to justice. They should not go unpunished.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes, it almost, we've had sort of through Women's March a couple of requests from foreign journalists, again, the classic way of, can you find me some women, some stories? And, instead of thinking about it in a more holistic way and really thinking about how to best support women and what stories to really highlight, it sometimes seems a bit extractive, the relationship that we Ukrainians have with foreign media outlets. I don't know if you've found that sometimes in some of the work that you've been doing as well.
Yes, well, sometimes, of course, there is a lack of empathy, I would say, on behalf of some international journalists towards what Ukrainians are going through and experiencing. It's not like always, of course, there are like, journalists who are kind of take into account the feelings of the people and, how to approach them. But sometimes, yeah, I agree. These are like just stories for many media, not like humans, not like people who have feelings. And what is actually also disturbing, I read today this an interesting an op-ed on the Open Democracy website, how international media are actually abusing the work of Ukrainian producers and fixers, and that there were occasions when international foreign journalists, Western journalists just didn't care whether their fixers had, bulletproof vests or helmets. They just basically told them and forced them to go to the most dangerous areas and ignored their local knowledge and their warnings that they shouldn't, sometimes like exposing themselves to the risk to their lives. So that's also, another problem, and that also fits, I think, our topic about like this colonial attitude in a way that, sometimes Ukrainians are taken less seriously because I think the colonial attitude actually, like the fact that they have the local knowledge, they are, from here, they speak the language. And if they are journalists, they also have experience in reporting. And the fact that you cannot read what they write because you do not speak the local language doesn't mean that they are worse reporters than you, coming from the West and thinking that you are a star here.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been a long story for many years. 6 journalists, unfortunately, already been killed in this war. But even before, with the Donbas war and the Russian invasion, I cannot recollect how many times I saw that fixers or Ukrainian producers or even journalists are being underpaid or not paid at all. And even now, during this, when everybody knows what we're going through, I still get requests from journalists who are basically asking me to do their job for them. Can you find me a link? Have you seen this and this? Can you, do that or this for me, without like even offering me a pay or compensation?
Yeah.
Or anything.
Or thanks.
Or I don't. I don't work for thanks anymore because of those years where actually during 2014, and you remember, Orla, when we worked twice as hard to trying to get the story out. And of course, you feel this kind of obligation that you must do it because nobody will talk about it or it will be misrepresented if you do not speak out. But at some point, you feel extremely exploited and abused because people do not even offer, to pay, or just like even sometimes no thanks, even in order, right?
Yeah, well, it's true. The fact that the work of local producers or fixers is very underappreciated and underpaid. It's a fact, and it's a huge problem. In fact, well, I'm not accepting this kind of like tasks anymore, although I'm still getting a lot of requests like to be a producer or to help, because this is an extremely hard work that consumes like most of your time, and usually like it's and like there are no like working hours, there are no like fixed working hours, like you're working 24/7. Basically you get little sleep because like when you're not accompanying journalists, you're making the calls and you're doing translations and you're doing like all the logistics, so like really little time to rest. And it's it's extremely like exhausting and draining, and then you don't even get your name when these reports go out. There is not
Right.
even your name is not even mentioned, so it's almost like you only get money if you get that, but that's somehow not enough. It's not satisfying. It's not how it should be. At least there should be a name. If the name is not there, it's not okay, because if a person does like the bulk of the work is not even mentioned, it's something, I think something is very wrong. And the problem is that actually a lot of like young journalists, they do not kind of think about that. They do not, they cannot somehow also defend themselves and ask for these things. And I was like that too, like many years ago. And now when I'm speaking with, some younger colleagues from Ukraine, I'll always tell them, do not do this work for free, like ask for compensation. Because I spoke with some Ukrainian guy like a couple of weeks ago when war already started. And he was asked by journalists of an Italian newspaper to help him. And he wasn't offered pay. And he was considering it because he wrote me like, I want to help. And I was like, are you crazy? Like, you should be paid. This is work. This is not like something volunteering, because it was like, I want to help this guy. So like, what should I do? Maybe you like he wanted my advice basically. And I said, well, yes, I can like give you like this context. Okay. But like, and also, but please do not do this work for free. It's not okay. And it's not even okay, I think. And it's not even ethical on behalf of foreign journalists to somehow not offer the pay, not ask the journalist, like, how much do you want to get paid? Like, so it's the journalist, the local, producer here in Ukraine that had to ask, like, are you going to pay me? Not the vice versa. And it's not okay. It shouldn't be like this.
Absolutely.
And I think byproduct of that is that we are where we are right now, right? In terms of the conversations around Ukraine, and that's why we've identified this need to decolonize conversations around Ukraine, because we end up in the same situation we were before the war as well. I wanted to actually ask both Maksym and Ola, if that's okay. I wanted to ask you, what would you say right now is that one thing that you would call out Western media on in terms of some of the assumptions or some of the narratives that they're spreading around Ukraine? What would you as a Ukrainian say, no, guys, this is wrong, and this is how you should look at what is going on in Ukraine? Because every day it changes, obviously. One day we're talking about humanitarian aid, another day we're talking about something else. So I just wanted to ask you both for today.
No, it's always the same. It's always to look through the situation and through what is happening through the lenses of Russian colonialism, because this is what is happening now, has been happening before for hundreds of years. The same pattern, the same sequence of events, just different nations, different people. Even to Ukraine has been happening before. It happened before and will happen after that if we do not look through this look at this situation through a deeper perspective, understanding why Russia is so obsessed with looting, raping, genocide us, and I would say this is it. This is all that connects all the dots all the time. And this perspective has been lacking in every news report, in every analysis. This is something that I've been, very frustrated for many years.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add the thought I had that, I don't know, it's not like a narrative, but something that I'm somehow getting irritated at when I hear that, the Western media are somehow like constantly surprised by the fact that Ukrainians are resisting, by the fact that Ukrainians are uniting, by the fact that Ukrainians are strong. And this surprise, for me, it reveals a lack of understanding of Ukraine and a lack of knowledge of Ukraine. Very few foreign journalists actually covered Ukraine in this period between 2014 and 2022. There was, of course, like the previous peak of coverage and of presence of international media in Ukraine was back in 2014. But Ukraine has changed so much over these 8 years, that even those who were in Ukraine back in 2014 and then like returned again this year, they find like completely different country, and that has changed so much, and all like their kind of ideas that they got back in 2014 are not applicable anymore because it's a completely different country. So my advice would be, just study Ukraine like some more, speak to people from Ukraine. Do not read like just Western experts on what they are writing about Ukraine, because that very often overlooks all this analysis. It very often overlooks the human element, the agency of Ukrainians themselves. And Ukrainians have a lot of agency. Ukraine is a democratic country with a very vibrant civil society, media scene, a lot of activists, human rights activists, LGBT activists, feminist movement, a vibrant cultural scene, musicians, film directors, documentary makers, artists, so many people that have been like building this country over these years and contributing so much to, the development of Ukraine. Like speak to these people and create like your understanding of Ukraine based on these conversations, not just like a couple of articles that you read by some like analysts who do not know Ukrainian people, who very often haven't been here, who are only speaking about some like theories of international relations, geopolitics and stuff. Like talk to people, get to know Ukrainians.
Yeah, we're coming back to the same thing you said in the beginning, that representation is at the core of all of it. If you don't know much about Ukraine, just offer the platform for Ukrainians and to Ukrainians, because we have fantastic number of brilliant, eloquent Ukrainians who speak perfect English and perfect other foreign languages, and they can carry that and do that job for you, explaining the country and pointing out to what is important and what is not, and where you need to pay attention. Olga, I wanted to also ask you about your style of journalism in general, because I also find it very powerful exhibit of this decolonized idea of what journalism is also about. You tweeted this morning something that was really resonating with me as well. You say, frankly, I cannot tweet all the terrible news we're getting in Ukraine every day. Each day, more and more personal stories of people who were killed, raped, tortured, or all normal people looking next door neighbors. It makes me feel sick, fills me with so much anger and hate. And then you say that despite all of that, you still feel an obligation to report on it. And I think it's a very powerful message for a lot of people, especially in the West, who still kind of push on us preconceptions of what journalism is, and how you mentioned that there's supposed to be this detachment from the story, that you're supposed to be so-called totally unbiased, objective, as they call it, where in fact, the stories where you don't have empathy and you don't have empathetic attachment to is not something worth covering even. And I think it's speaks a lot through your stories as well. What do you think about it? Like, how do you find this balance when you empathetic towards the story, but you also need to tell it in a right way?
Well, we are all humans and journalists are humans. And it's important, I think, to recognize that we are and we are vulnerable to, and we are also feeling pain, we are feeling suffering, and that we are also indifferent, we are not indifferent to the war and to the suffering and to injustice that we are seeing. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well. And of course, when I'm like writing my articles, I do not put a lot of myself in them. I let my protagonists, people I speak with, talk, and sometimes I get these remarks from my editors who are saying that it looks like an interview more than an article. Because I really like to let people speak for themselves. I like to include a lot of quotes. I do not like to retell people's words with my own words. And I see a lot of journalists do that, and on TV sometimes, in some countries more than in the other ones. But I really don't like it. So I want, my interlocutors to speak and to tell their story. I can help them with doing that by connecting like different parts of the story, by, making some like logical passages and connections in a story. And of course, like now in this very difficult period in the life of every Ukrainian and every Ukrainian journalist, while I write my articles with the maximum like detachment, and I'm letting people speak for themselves, but I see like social media and Twitter as something where I can actually be more personal and human, and speak about my feelings and also show my vulnerability, that I'm not just an objective reporter, at least not all of the time, right? That some of the time I'm a human and I have feelings and I feel pain and I feel anger and I feel frustration and all the range of feelings that a lot of Ukrainians are feeling now.
Yeah, and the best journalism definitely comes from that place where you care. You can be factual, you can do your job professionally, but your story will be the best one when you care and when you empathize and you have some stake in it as well.
But also, I think no one should police our emotions, right? We are personally affected by what's happening right now. And, a lot of organizations and media outlets and so on, for a very long time prior to, not just this, but in general, if you were from a country, you weren't allowed to report on that country. You weren't allowed to work on that country because of, everything that we discussed today. And I just think it's so great that we are moving further and further away from that point in time where actually people who know something about our countries are allowed to now speak from that place of care and knowledge that I think both of you have so brilliantly highlighted here. So I just hope there's more and more of that, and that we can use whether our journalism or our social media activity to be able to do that.
Oh yeah, honestly speaking, I think Ola also confirmed. Like 20 years ago, when I started, like almost 20 years ago, when I started, was it 20 years ago? No, it was 19. When I started being a journalist, and I was just like blank pointly told that you cannot cover Ukrainian English because you're Ukrainian. And then it happened, 10 years later as well. Like I was denied some jobs and gigs on Ukraine, just because, well, you cannot tell the story, you're like automatically biased. And now seeing so many Ukrainian journalists like Olga getting well-deserved attention and spotlight, it just fills me with so much joy, because we've came a long way reclaiming this space for Ukrainian voices. So, Ola, I wanted to ask you one question. It's a bit, kind of personal, but feel free to share whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But when you decided to cover Ukraine for the foreign audience or Western audience, what kind of pushed you to do that? What kind of motivated you to do this at that time quite, ungrateful work?
Well, I don't know whether there was, this somehow like point when I have taken this conscious decision. It just happened because of the events that were happening in Ukraine. Well, it started actually back in 2013, right, with the Revolution of Dignity, with Maidan protests, when I just first started getting requests from mostly Italian media about what was happening, and I felt it was important to provide information from the ground and also to explain some context. And there was actually some interest into context. There were some reports. There was even a short documentary done with me. Where actually it was interesting because I was supposed to work just as a producer for the TV crew. And while we were traveling around Ukraine, that was in spring of 2014, we were traveling across Ukraine, and I was of course explaining to them all the background, the history, and they were filming me. And in the end, they made it me as a protagonist of this short documentary that they did, although that wasn't the original idea. And then somehow I realized that the knowledge I have is important, and it's important to share it. And then of course for the next 6 years, I was focused more on speaking with the Ukrainian audience, working as international news reporter, presenter at Hromadske. And then, it was just somehow again, I was getting this request to explain Ukraine since last year more and more. And then especially, as Russia started the build up on Ukraine borders back in May last year. And somehow, it just turned so that I refocused my attention again on being this correspondent in Ukraine for international media. And I've been working for a year actually with the Spanish news agency EFE as their correspondent in Kyiv. That was a very interesting experience that helped me a lot, and somehow also what I'm doing now is also thanks to that experience, because on the one hand I found a genuine interest on behalf of the editors of this agency to having a Ukrainian reporting for them. So they were actually looking for a Ukrainian person, Ukrainian journalist in Kyiv. They didn't want to
very rare.
hire, and that's what very rare, and that's what I was really appreciative of. And I was like, wow, the first time I see actually, or one of really rare times when the agency is looking for a Ukrainian person, and they said we prioritize, we want it to be Ukrainian because we know that you have more knowledge and you have more expertise. And although I didn't speak Spanish, well, I understand some Spanish, but I don't write in Spanish. I do not speak it, and I said, okay, I don't want to write in Russian. I will write in English for you. And they said, well, okay, no problem. You can write both in Russian or in English. We'll translate into Spanish. But I said I don't want to write in Russian. I will write in English. And that also helped me because over this year when I was reporting for them and writing in English, I got my English writing skills perfected in a way, so it helped me. And also, I tried to tell the stories from Ukraine that are usually not in the information space, because that was still, as I said, a year before the full-scale invasion. And while there was a focus on Ukraine during Russian military build-up in spring last year, all the other time, while Ukraine was basically absent from the radar of international media. So, for me, also it took some creativity to come up with the stories that could be interesting. And I'm very actually happy because I reported on some stories that I think are very important and were very important and are very important. I reported on the situation of Crimean Tatars who are, are repressed in occupied Crimea by Russia. I reported about the arrests of Crimean Tatars and also of journalists in Crimea. This kind of gives you an idea of, the level of repressions that was there on Russian occupied territories. And we are seeing
what is happening now in southern
and we are
Ukraine.
seeing it repeated, again in southern Ukraine. So I reported on, for the anniversary of the independence of Ukraine, 30th anniversary, and also the 30th anniversary of the USSR collapse. I interviewed 2 Ukrainian dissidents, people who spent years in Soviet gulags, who were fighting for independent Ukraine back in the Soviet times, and their stories are not known in the West. They are not known abroad. And I'm, happy that my editors, they were interested in this kind of stories, and that they gave me the opportunity to tell them and, to somehow bring more attention to these stories, because these stories are important to understand what Ukraine is, that Ukraine is not, a country that just like emerged 30 years ago out of nowhere. And before that, it was Russia or, Soviet Union or whatever. It gives you an understanding that Ukrainians were fighting for their own, state and independence for centuries, for decades in the Soviet Union. It gives an understanding of repressions they were facing, of persecution they were facing, and they are still facing in the areas occupied by Russia. So I think, I'm actually like proud of this experience. And I was able to report these stories. Yeah.
And folks, just listen up. I know that there are many also journalists listening to us, and I so appreciate Olga's work, especially, for many years, but especially in the last year, because she's been telling the stories and raising those alarms for over a year. Stories that had human touch to it, that were kind of already, warning about impending catastrophe back then, when the buildup was starting. And the thing that I always appreciated about that, because, the coverage back then was very flat, very Western, like this analysis, what will happen if the invasion starts, who has what kind of military capacity, geopolitics, shit, whatever. And Olga's stories and the stories of many other Ukrainian journalists were really filled with important, crucial storytelling that would connect those historical dots and showing that, what is coming, again, has been happening to us before, will happen again if we do not start listening to Ukrainians sharing their stories. So I'm super appreciative of what you've been doing in the last year. I know that Valeria has a final question to you.
Yeah, of course. And just to say, you basically showed why Ukrainians have to report on Ukraine and not other people.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And we usually round these off with one final question to all of our guests. And I wanted to ask you as well. You spoke about this already indirectly through the work that you've been doing and the things that you've been covering. But we always ask, what does Ukraine actually mean to you? What values represent Ukraine for you? And what does being Ukrainian mean to you personally?
Well, Ukraine is my country. It's the country I love. It's my home. And, I studied abroad. I got my master's degree in Italy at Bologna University, and I had a chance to stay, live in another country. But I returned to Ukraine. It was my conscious choice that I never regretted, because I felt that there is, so much space for to make a difference here, that I can make a difference, that I can contribute to the development of my country, to, the building its democracy. And that's what I was like doing in all these years as a journalist, because, reporting is contributing to democracy. What is Ukraine? Like, what does it mean for me in general in terms of values? It's a country of freedom. We have the saying, freedom is our religion, and that's it. That's something I think very crucial to understand about the Ukrainian spirit. And the fact that for so many, centuries, Russia tried to break this spirit, but it failed. It's what gives me hope and what gives me actually confidence that Ukraine and Ukrainians will prevail and will triumph this time again. The only, question is what would be the cost, like in terms of human lives, in terms of suffering, of destruction, but there should be no doubt, for anyone in the West, abroad generally, because I don't want to, just speak with the audience in the West. I hope that people from the South, from the East are listening as well. There shouldn't be any doubt that Ukrainians are not going to give up, that they are going to fight, but they need your support. We can't do it on our own. It's not just our struggle. I think it's a common struggle of everyone who believes in freedom, in democracy, in the right of people to determine their own destiny, in the fact that people have a voice, and that people matter. Because I firmly believe that everyone matters and everyone can do something to contribute to a change, to change something, that everyone can do something, and every voice matters. And we Ukrainians have shown it so many times during, our revolutions. And I also, as a journalist, I saw it, I saw the impact that the voice of journalists can make. And it's so important. And this is something that exists in Ukraine. It doesn't exist in Russia. And it should be defended. It should be protected. It's worth fighting for.
Yeah,
100%.
That's very powerful. Okay, thank you so much. We are with Valeria. We're beyond grateful for all the time that you donated to this, especially coming live from your basement, where you're forced to work and forced to report. I'm forever grateful for your work, but also sending you so much love as a friend as well. I hope we will see each other soon, and we'll celebrate, and we will rebuild, and it's going to be a different occasion. Really hopes. I not hopes. I know so. I'm not hoping. I know so.
Yeah, I know that too. And thank you so much also for having me for this conversation, for your very important perspective, through this decolonization lens. That's really what is still largely missing. And I really want to thank you, Maksym, for, drawing the attention to this subject and to looking at the whole debate through this lens.
Yep.
And you guys will have a whole new generation of young Ukrainian journalists to train up as soon as this is over, if not now already. So just keep your energy for rebuilding Ukraine and our sort of force of journalism within the country. Thank you both so much.
Yes, Valeria, you were right. And, I actually want to commend my Ukrainian colleagues, and some of them are in this conversation, who are doing an amazing job now reporting for Ukrainian media, for Ukrainians, what is happening. And it's a pity that not much of that coverage, gets to international audience, because not all media, very few media actually in Ukraine can afford to do English translations. And I know that some of them are launching fundraising campaigns to, do the English translations of their coverage. So if you see this request, and I'll be sharing them on my Twitter as well, because I want to help my colleagues, please consider donating to them, also to support Ukrainian media, Ukrainian journalism, and to read their brilliant coverage in English.
Yes, thank you. Okay, folks, thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Heroям slava.
And we'll see you soon. Use Ukrainian Spaces hashtag to suggest guests you want to feature, you want us to feature, or topics, or just share your perspectives. We'll definitely amplify it. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.